So it's me again, but it's my pleasure because we have another debate with our special guests. We decided to invite all of our guests who came here today. So I'm not going to introduce everyone. I'll just introduce two people. Mirka hasn't introduced before because they weren't present in the previous debate. So among everyone who was included in the previous talk, I would also like to welcome Estelle Renard. Estelle is a very active member of AFTE, Audiovisual Translators Europe. She's also a member of the board of AFTE, together with Amalie and together with Mirka. Estelle is a French translator. She works in subtitling, voiceover and dubbing for the last 18 years. She's also a very active member and member of board of ATA, the French Association of Audiovisual Translators. And another person we haven't mentioned before, it is someone of whom the face might not be that familiar to you, but the name definitely is, because it is our Czech colleague Miroslav Pošta. Mirek, I'm very happy you can be here with today. Mirek is also very active in translating, subtitling, but also he works as quality controller. I'm sure especially our students and graduates, but also some of our colleagues are familiar with his book, Subtitling professionally, titulkujeme profesionálne, which maps the standards for subtitling in our region. And you can also get familiar with the new baby, which was born just a few days ago. And it's the second book Mirek wrote, Subtitling Question and Answers, so a bit of advertising for Mirek. And you know all the rest, so what we are going to do? Well, the title sounds very catchy. We have 1 hour, so let's see what we can cover. But basically what we will try to do in our debate is to have a look at information on audiovisual translators in Europe. We will try to define who they are, or maybe better, who they are. We will try to look at the changing situation on the market, and Jean-François already mentioned that when he said that some of the contexts are changing, especially when we speak about us as dubbing and subtitling countries, which again still is true, but many of things has changed in the last 10 years. And the SWOT analysis, it is a concept most of you know. It's analysis of strengths and weaknesses, not only of people, but we will look at strengths and weaknesses of audiovisual translators, and also at the opportunities the profession offers today. Also maybe at the threats which might be there if we don't deal with some of the aspects responsibly. So I'm not going to try to tell you who the audiovisual translators are just from the few people I know who are my friends and who work in the field. But at the first part I will just briefly mention some of the most concluding information from the European Survey on Audiovisual Translators' Competencies. I think everyone who sits here in front with me helped me to spread this survey to the translators, but also many of you who sit in the audience, so thank you for that. I will not speak about all of the aspects which were there, just the crucial ones which will help us steer the debate later on. Basically, the survey was reached by 304 audiovisual translators in Europe. In some of the countries, we could also speak about some generalizing comments. For example, in case of Slovakia, where we had the sample of 37 translators, we could say we basically covered most of the people who deal with the profession here. In some of the countries, we had less respondents, but the survey is just showing tendencies in Europe. It's definitely not saying that this is how it is in all of the cases. Also, very important thing to mention is that most of the respondents who were in the survey were in age groups between 25 to 35 years old, and then 36 to 46 years old. So we speak about the younger translators, and then we speak about the middle generation. This is just to give you an idea who was covered there. We covered 25 countries. It was very interesting because it gave us some information. Those of you who participated in the survey know that there were many questions on many aspects. There are just few things I would like to comment on now. First, as a person who works in academia as a trainer of audiovisual translators, I was interested in training and in the strengths and weaknesses of audiovisual translators. That means in how well and how confidently they feel they were, or how well they were trained in some of the competencies. These are just the very general comments, which in relation to the audiovisual training show us that basically we can see the strongest confidence levels in language and culture competence. This is probably something we are doing well at universities, but in relation to academia and the training gained for audiovisual translation, for me quite surprising, were the maybe lower levels of satisfaction with the provided training on technologies, but we can interpret it in many, many ways. And in translation service provision competence. Translation service provision competence is a competence which somehow covers our performance on the market, how we are able to look for new clients, how we are able to approach new clients, how we can adapt to changing markets, how we can work with contracts, how are we familiar with legislation, with papers, with admin, everything else than the translation we have to deal with if we want to get paid. But this was only school. More interesting, but this is just the general part, and I'll select some of the particular issues. Quite interesting for me were the results related to the confidence levels in present. So it means not when I was trained, not first years after school. Of course, you don't feel confident in many things, that's natural. But now, when you are in the profession, and what we can see, basically, the question was that you should mention which of the areas you feel you need to improve. The violet color or the purple color says that the need is very strong, green is that it's only strong, and the orange is that it's that it is needed. The other two ones are the lower levels. So on this we can see that language translation were okay, of course that's natural. Technology didn't maybe have such surprising result, at least for me, because audiovisual translators work with technology and normally don't have many issues with technologies. But the strong desire for improvement, or the reply that me as a translator, I feel I need to improve in something, almost on the same or even higher level than new technological trends, because the trends, this was something that was mentioned there, where again, the things related to performance on the market. And this is interesting, maybe also for our debate, and I'll get to it very soon, that if I would think about a translator who is in practice for 15 years, it does surprise me a bit, especially if I get to some of the particular aspects, that this translator feels very confident in signing papers, in arranging conditions for his or her work, in approaching clients, in communication with his client. And this can't be generalized, it's related only to some of the clients and some of the aspects, but we will get to it soon. If I look at all of the competencies, I would like to mention some of the top issues for the main competencies in general. And for language, culture, translation, and technology, I put this all together. One of the biggest issues was machine translation. I mentioned it in one of the events before. It basically started strong hate wave towards me when this question was asked. And as a translator, I do understand it in audiovisual translation. So technologies as such aren't a big issue. Machine translation is becoming an issue in audiovisual translation. We all know why, because machine translation is becoming present in audiovisual translation. So this is something we have to mention. Personal and interpersonal competence, that means the internal things related to us as translator. This probably doesn't surprise any of us, because the biggest issues were planning, time and stress management. It was mentioned also before by Mirka. And in particular to the market performance or the translation service provision competence, one of the biggest issues were finding and approaching clients, budgeting, managing projects, reacting to market demands, but it's understandable that we do feel certain worries in this aspect as translator, or maybe the young translators, and basically all of the translators react with lists and lists of their not very ideal experience and problems in relation to working conditions and their contracts, and copyrights, and the rights they have as translators in general. So for me, some of these results maybe gave me better perspective as a trainer, as a university trainer, because maybe some of the things need more attention from our side, but for other things, I would like to have our guests to comment on them. And I will start with the technologies, and I will start with machine translation. Maybe I would turn to Amalie at first, because Amalie was absolutely great in the conference of Stockholm, and she made great point about technologies. And maybe I would like her to share her ideas also here with you, also maybe mainly with those of you who are starting to be active in our field.
Yes, we as translators, as subtitlers and dubbing translators, we are sometimes, especially the subtitlers, I think, we are accused of being Luddites, afraid of the technology, afraid it will push us out of our work and so on. I find the Luddite analogy very trite. It gets trotted out very often. I find it really trite. This is a group of people whose children were, people starved to death in the UK when the Luddites were smashing machines. So they absolutely had something to be dissatisfied with. We like the technology that enables us to work faster and better. The problem is that nobody has the money or the interest in developing technology that is helpful to a lot of individual translators, subtitlers, who need to improve their working speeds or ease of research and so on, which is, we have individual needs as well. Sorry, preferences vary. So there's not a lot of development going on that is on our behalf, so to say. This is a lot of engineers playing around. They may have funding and they're working with academics sometimes, and they come up with something. And they're saying we now have this computer-assisted translation, or we have this tool or this interface, and with this you can work this much faster, and then we can pay you correspondingly less, or even more than correspondingly less, or we can. You're not a translator. The machine or the software does the translation, and you are the post editor. So you take what is very often a complete garble. It doesn't mean anything, or even worse, it almost means anything, and then you have to turn that into actual language and meaningful language. And when it's almost meaningful, when it's almost a match, that's actually the worst thing, because you work on it, and as you work, you get tired and things begin to slip past you. You think, this is why it's difficult to be a good proofreader also, because you have to keep your focus constantly through a barrage of terrible mistakes, and sometimes not so terrible mistakes, and they slip past you. So this thing, we now have this computer-assisted thing, and therefore you can work for half the price, is usually just not true. It's not the case. But they create these various companies who buy the technology or develop the technology. They create their own reality in which we can do the work for half the price or less, because we're only post-editors. Does that answer your question?
Does this work out? It does. Yeah, to me it does. Let's maybe turn to Mirek, because Mirek, you also work with technologies, and I always like to hear about some new software, a new tool, and something new which can help me. what do you think? Are technologies a threat? Also, of course, we are not speaking about the basic things and tools we use in subtitling, for example, also in dubbing, because we can't work without that. But how do you see that, and maybe what is the approach of translators in Czech Republic, where we recently had the case with the last episodes of Big Bang Theory, and I think that was quite a big thing, because that was machine translation, wasn't it?
Well, in my opinion, technologies, including machine translation, are both an opportunity and a threat. First of all, I think that everyone is afraid of the unknown. As long as you have no experience with machine translation, you are perhaps too much afraid of it. And I've seen that these same people who were fighting against it at the beginning, then later on when they were introduced to the results of machine translation, they started to like it in a way. So it can be helpful, but it can be dangerous as well, because as you said, when the translation is almost meaningful, it's very dangerous. You can miss something and leave it there in the translation. But I think it's dangerous if you are asked to provide discounts, or when you earn less money. And I think this is even more important more relevant in audiovisual translation, because you have more contexts. It's more than just the words. It's the action. It's the gestures, and so on and so forth. So, for example, when you have a simple sentence like "come on" in English, it can be translated in, I don't know, 10 different ways, depending on the context, depending on what happened previously, and so on. And if you have to offer a discount for this segment, although each time you had to translate it differently, it's a problem, and it simply shouldn't happen. So I think it's both a threat and an opportunity.
When we speak about machine translation, we've seen something similar happen in the other fields, and I'm definitely not against against machine translation in general. But as you said, it seemed to be a big thing in theory, because subtitles would make sense because it's short segments, and in the end it just doesn't work. So for me, a discount, and I'm sure you all would agree with me, would work in case I spend less time on subtitling. But if I don't, then it just doesn't really work for me. Do you have experience, or do maybe members of AFTE have experience with increasing amount of tasks related to machine translation, tasks related to work with memories? Do they share that really this is an issue in their practice? Because I do understand it appears in academic conference because it is a hot topic. But what is it in practice?
We don't actually, if I speak about France, we don't have it yet in France, so I wouldn't be able to speak about that. The only thing we heard about in EVTE is some experience made in between languages that were very close, extremely close, like Danish and Swedish, and Norwegian. And also in between Serbian and Croatian, I think we had that. And the result, even with these very close languages, was not satisfactory. I mean, the translator was still spending a lot of time. And what we found out is that we are starting with this machine translation. It doesn't help us. It makes us it degrades us to post editors, although we still make the same work. Apparently, from that little experience we have, is that we are paid as post editors, but the work is still being a translator. So, in that perspective, it's not a good development. It's not I don't know.
Also, the spoken language does not lend itself to machine translation. I mean, which is, it's very logic, it's very elementary. If you have technical texts or medical or you know, the little notes that are inside a box of tablets. That's the sort of thing that lends itself to machine translation. And it still needs careful editing. I am very much opposed to this post-editor thing. It is also an insult to editors and proofreaders, because this is a different job from the one we do, and it's a highly skilled one as well. There hasn't been, since World War II, when they've been working intensively on machine translation, that we still haven't got something that works really well for spoken language, which is, by its very nature, is chaotic. So much money has gone into it, and so little has come out of it. It's almost like all the money that's gone into, and all the time and effort that's gone into proving that one race is superior to another race. A lot of people spent a lot of time and a lot of money proving that one, and they didn't manage to, fortunately. But it's sort of the same senseless race, because we are still at the point where a translator with a couple of years' experience can do a much better job than a program. So then you think, what is really at stake here? And this is something that's happening in a lot of professions, is you partition up the work. You reduce the skill level, and you portion the work into little bits. So there is not a continual process. You say, this 17-year-old whom I can underpay does this bit. Somebody else does that bit. Somebody else. It's not because there isn't money in media. There's a lot of money in media, but it goes to somebody else. Even this relatively modest amount of money that goes to the translator, some of it can be siphoned off into another field. It happens in a lot of professions, and it is, of course, the driving force behind a lot of what is happening at the moment. And we should not just say, all right, we shouldn't be Luddites, we should go with the machine translation, because it's not, as it stands, it doesn't do us any favors, and it doesn't do quality any favors, the translation quality any favors. So why have it? We need interfaces that are intuitive and simple and work for us. We need very easy access to research. We need all kinds of what have you that will speed up our work process. That's what we need. Thank you.
I'd also like to say that I see a lot of young people here today. We're speaking from the position of old translators who have been trained and who have worked with this process without machine translation. But just remember, you as young people need to be in our position, because if you start working as post-editors for low rates, it's never going to get better for you. Even with experience, even with all the qualifications you have, if a company sees that you're ready to work for those rates, they're going to keep paying you those rates. So remember in the back of your minds that you are worth something, okay?
Okay, Amalie and then Jean-Francois.
Sorry, one small thing I want to add is that in order to be a good post-editor, you have to be a good translator and a good editor. So you shouldn't be paid less than the subtitler. You should actually be paid more, because it's a much harder job.
Jean-Francois and then Mirka. And then maybe, Mirka, you can keep the mic, because next question will go to you as well.
This is related to machine translation, but on a with a wider perspective. A machine, as I mentioned earlier in my talk, audiovisual translation is a very singular form of translation, because it has to take into account a polysemic context. A machine can't do that. It's sometimes even difficult for a human being to do that, to take everything in consideration to achieve a proper translation and to know how to select things, especially in subtitling when you can't translate everything. So you have to, every time you have a new line, you do a very quick, and probably quicker than a machine, selection of, and put things into priorities of what you're going to translate. Which leads me to think about your questionnaire. I was surprised to see an item missing, because you asked people about language, cultural knowledge, translation competence or skills, but I didn't see anything in film language skills. By film, I mean, okay, audiovisual, whatever it is, audiovisual products, as they say, whether it's a series, The Big Bang Theory, or a documentary on the Neolithic period or whatever, it's the same language, basically. So whether it's fiction, film, or that, it's a series, a succession of shots, of editing, of sound and visual combinations. We have a project which we haven't implemented yet within ATA in France and AVTE in general in Europe, to go and talk to film students in film schools about the importance of translation and when it should occur in the whole chain of working. Equally so, we definitely need, and even more so with each generation, I think, to go to translation schools, especially to audiovisual translation training schemes, and make younger people aware of having a keen sense of film language. Because if you know how to analyze or understand, even simply understand how shots are linked together in a film, even if it's a fiction film, then you can apply this to any other audiovisual context.
Thank you very much. Maybe just a short reaction, because I absolutely agree with you, Jean-Francois. These are just some, very short data, but I'm doing a follow-up. I already started, and I'm looking at how audiovisual translation is being taught in schools. And you would be surprised that the film language is not a part of that in most of the countries. And we see that it is a big problem. We were talking about it with producers yesterday, and I absolutely agree with you that it's great that we are all teaching subtitling and softwares and what you can use and how to do this and that. But now, even as teachers, I have also colleagues here today, sometimes the problem is that the students just can't really work with the film. So this is something very, very important. When I looked at several areas covering what are the issues with communication with your client and signing contract and the rights and the payments, I didn't look at the sums, of course, but there were two big differences in the confidence level. So that means that translators had very different views, now speaking regionally, and the lowest confidence level in this sort of, or group of competencies, was from Central European region. The highest was from France. So, what is it? Is it a cultural thing? Because we are a bit different. We could speak a lot about Slovaks, that we like to get angry, but sometimes that's very tense. Is it that the education does something differently? Is it that there were more activities done? Is it that more is done in this area in general? Is it that art and culture is valued more in the other countries? I'm not speaking Slovakia and France only, but France really was, somewhere else. And we had quite many respondents from France, so it wasn't maybe just Estelle or just someone. So what do you think? Maybe Mirka, the mic is on your side, so we can start with you. Maybe also Mirek could take a few comments.
One thing, I think it is cultural difference. In Slovakia, I don't know, in the Czech Republic maybe also to some extent, but there was a culture that it is not proper or appropriate to talk about money. People are afraid to talk about money. So somebody calls you up and, okay, I have this business for you, and they don't ask how much you want and you don't ask. So people, I don't know whether this is your personal experience as translators, but we have to cut this circle because they need to know how much it costs them and we need to know how much they would pay. And if we are not frank about this, then it's a vicious circle of unanswered questions, so you don't know. That's one thing. The other thing is that maybe people among themselves won't tell each other. And I don't mean to say that you have to say specifically how much you work for, because this is a private information. But if we do not have any idea, then how do you set your own value? You don't know whether your colleague works for €1 or for 100 euros. And it's a big difference. So if we do not cut this vicious circle, then you cannot move forward. You are not assertive enough, and we have to do something about that. It's cultural thing, but I think it is changing, and I hope with the young generation this is changing. I know that the older generation, you can't change your habits, but if you are not assertive enough, then it's your bad. You're going to lose. I don't know, Mirka.
Well, maybe the universities which train translators in our region, maybe some of them don't find it academic enough to teach these subjects. Another thing is that maybe it's only the way I feel it, but I think that many translators, or the majority of translators, are quite submissive. I don't know the reason behind that, but I think it's true. And they are they are not, even when they are offered courses like that, some of them are not really interested in them. Very few people pursue lifelong learning. For many of my colleagues, it's everything finished with the day of graduation, and they don't go to any courses, any training. They don't want to hear anything about CAD tools, about doing business. So I think we'll have to change the setup in our minds, so as to say, and it's going to take some time. I think, however, that the younger generations are different in this respect. Maybe sometimes they are much more assertive, and hopefully it will help them.
Well, let's hope and let's see how France gets so assertive. Estelle, maybe you have some tips for us.
Yes, I just wanted to add something. Sorry, you wanted to speak. About France, maybe, I thought, I don't know, top of my head, that's because we have audiovisual translators are authors. I mean, it's a social status. So the fact that they have this status, even the younger, when you start, you are an author, and you are a member of a CMO, a collective management organization, and the fact that you have this status, I think, gives you status. So you are someone. You are not just this person that comes at the very end of the process and that to whom you give just what's the crumbs that are left. You are an author. So maybe that's one kind of possibility for other countries.
And I think another thing that helps us to be more assertive in France as well is the fact that there are rates which are recommended by the SNAC, which is the Syndicat National des Auteurs-Compositeurs, the Writers' Union. They recommend rates. People don't necessarily have to work for those rates because they are quite high, and many producers, specifically French producers, cannot pay them. But at least you know how much you can ask for as a maximum, and then you can organize yourself according to that. So there is perhaps a little more openness about rates.
Can I just ask you about their legal status? Are they a trade union, or what are they? Because I'm told that in the EU only trade unions can have recommended rates.
It's not a fixed rate, it's just a recommended rate. So it's not obligatory, because that would be illegal within the European Union. But you can sort of state a recommended rate.
So, for example, ATA could recommend to the members that this is something which is there. Maybe this is the minimum price which could be accepted, or the highest. See, and here we have the difference. Okay, it's not only fees, fares. It's not only how much we get. It's not only deadlines. Mirka said that your name is there in the end, maybe not even that in some of the countries. That was a big problem. It's all of the rights which we can somehow find or not find in the contract we sign and in the cooperation. Where does it bring us if we look at the market as we see it today? This is just to add a bit of information. You remember I was looking at for more information about your clients, of course nothing that would harm anyone, and you can see that still most of the translators work mainly with clients from their country. The numbers of translators who work with clients from abroad or from outside the European Union is not that low. But if we look at the percentage of translators who work only with domestic clients, not with the ones from abroad, it's 28%. The number is not very high, so we probably have to start thinking about what is changing for us with clients coming from abroad, and probably this opens many, many issues. Amalie, for example, in After, did you come across these issues? And I know maybe you did.
Oh, certainly, yes.
So which are maybe the most current things you are trying to sort out now in this perspective, and what are the main opportunities we have? Of course, we could say more work is coming, but where should we be most careful?
Well, we're trying to do everything at once. There's so much that needs doing. But there are, of course, the latest thing is the big streaming companies, the big streaming services, whatever you call them, and a lot of companies working for them. They will have international companies as their vendors, and these vendors will then try and get the work done as cheaply as possible. The vendors may not have any knowledge of the subtitling or translation, but just think, you know, I'm good at doing business, so I can do this. And the work suffers, of course, and the fees suffer terribly. So we try to educate our members. We try to ask to tell young people, to tell translators to join their national association or local. You know, sometimes there's more than one association. Just join your association, please. Just do it. And if it's actually a union, it's even better. In Denmark, we are members of a union, as they are in Sweden. And this whole thing that you're not allowed to join a union if you're a freelancer because a one-person company or a self-employed person is the same as a big company, that has been challenged by the Council of Europe decision. So that is wonderful news for us. And, you know, and we know that several countries that don't have associations are forming them now. And they're either independent associations or part of the Literary or Technical Translators Association, or even something else. You know, just find your association and join it is the first thing. And we try and educate our members in all the different countries about fees, about contracts. We get these ridiculous contracts coming in, American style, that cover. I think the main difference between Europe and the rest of and the US is that the spirit of the letter is enough for a European contract. They are detailed, but the letter of the letter is what matters in the US. So they are maniacally detailed. and they will take in acts of God and this dimension, whatever other dimensions that may be discovered, and they read like something written by an insane person, really, to a European. But this is how they operate, and a European translator will very often meet one of those contracts, and this is what we're trying to work on. In fact, in a meeting with representatives of Netflix, we explained this, that these contracts are very shocking to Europeans and difficult to deal with, and they were surprised. So I think I've lost myself a little here because there's so much going on. Tell me.
Yeah,
be more
contracts
specific.
and the differences in contracts. You haven't lost yourself. Maybe just to give some of the students clear idea. And I am not talking about anyone specific. It wasn't any of the main broadcasters. But my last contract, I was signing at 38 pages.
Yes, ridiculous.
This is how different
yeah.
the contracts can be,
Yes.
not the contracts with Netflix, for example, and definitely not some of the contracts which come here, but different does mean very
Yeah.
different.
But the thing is that as a translator, if you worked in the business, from day one, you know that what you're working on is confidential. And you may not talk about the specifics of what you're working on to anybody. You may not reveal the content of what you're working on, and possibly you can't even say which project you're working on. So we all know this, and this would also, we sign some kind of agreement with the company we work for. It's a 1-2 page thing, and it will be covered in the law. If you reveal something, if you leak something, you will be in trouble. There's no need for these enormous to be slapped with a. I've seen them. I saw one that was this thick. I kid you not. So that's a problem because a lot of translators are intimidated by this. Yeah, I think I should just stop now.
We will continue with the topic because really signing the contracts with clients from outside European Union showed many problems for most of the translators. If you look at the red color and if you look at the yellow color, sorry, and the green color, these are people who have problems with this contract, and that's really 2/3. So one of the things which is related to the differences in the systems, Europe and outside Europe, but also within our countries, is the area of copyrights and royalties. AFTE is doing a lot of work in this. Also Mirka is very active for Slovakia together with SPOOL. Maybe some of you would also say the same. I think everyone who came to LITA workshop yesterday is fine, but Estelle and AFTE did interesting work on this, and Estelle already mentioned CMO. It's something similar than our LITA, like our LITA. So maybe Estelle, if you could tell us a bit about your findings, and if the others can add then a few information, that would be very valuable, because here we are speaking about all of the countries represented in AFTE.
Yes, just a word about that very tiny study. It was more something to do between us, because we are 15 members in AVTE, and we had just one answer per country. So the aim was not to have a global answer, but it was actually the reverse. We wanted to be able to compare in between our working conditions, and author rights was one of them. What can we? What is in? Yes. So we see that not everybody answered. So maybe that's people did not understand the question. I don't know. So there's only a third. Three-quarter. But I don't know if, I think France is the only country where it is actually a status, like a social status. I mean, we put that in our tax declaration. In Croatia as well? Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yes, yeah.
Because it's artistic work.
Yeah, and I think the three-quarter is that you are entitled, when you are simply recognized as authors, you are entitled to be member of a CMO, so a collective management organization, and so you are entitled to get either primary or secondary rights. And we see that there is 3 countries where people get primary rights, and there's a very huge difference. I don't know if you're familiar with this, the difference between primary and secondary rights. That, for instance, in France, being a primary rights country, each time I do mostly documentaries translation. Each time my documentary is aired on the network, I get a compensation. I get money for that. And primary rights are currently half of my revenue. It means I am paid for when I translate, and I am paid when my work is aired, shown. Sorry. And secondary rights, Mirka would be more able to, because it's also sort of a blur to me what it is exactly, but retransmission. So it's not first transmission, it's retransmission afterwards. And there are still countries where you don't get either primary or secondary rights. And then in these countries, you might get a compensation, like a lump sum. So this is not, the interesting thing in primary rights is that it's proportionate. And it means that you get a share of the value you've created, because each time you translate something, you add a value. And then most of the times in Europe, you don't get a share of that value you created. But being an author and being able to have primary rights gives you access to that money that actually belongs to you. Because it's not right that only the producer or the networks would benefit from your work.
Then you also looked at, maybe we can jump here. You also looked at how much do the translator get in their countries for subtitling, I think for dubbing as well. So also all of you can see some of the results.
Yeah.
What were the findings?
Yes, I'm sorry, this is not, because this was very quickly done and we are not experts in extracting data. So this could be very much clearer. So I'm afraid it's not very clear like that. But so there was 3 contexts. I mean, prices, well, the rate you can be paid varies between either you're working for the cinema, the TV, or a streaming company or DVD. Usually platforms and DVD, it's where you are paid less, and then TV is okay, and then cinema, which is very a niche side of it, you get a lot. So the first column would be, again, there was only one answer per country. So so we can see that you get for platform, there are actually the majority of countries are the rate are between 1 and 3 euros per minute, and you can see the difference with one country for cinema being paid more than 15 euros, and I think that's actually France. And in France, you are paid 4.6 euros per subtitle, not a minute, per subtitle. Recommended, but most of the people are, well, you're not, but in between.
Can you give an average? How many subtitles? For example, we have 1,000 subtitles for cinema. That means 1,000 times 1,000.
Yes.
So that you get an idea of how much. Yeah.
Yes, in a movie where you have between 800 maybe and 800, yeah, and 1,200. So that's another question, yes. The fact that we are mostly paid per minute, while being paid per subtitle would maybe be more advantageous, or at least it would be more, a better reflection of the work, thank you. Yeah. But I think there was one, because our countries are very different, and if you want to buy a beer in Slovakia and a beer in France or a beer in Norway, it's not the same. So what we did is also ask a question. I don't think we have it here.
No, I think we didn't take the picture. But
yeah, because it was too complicated. So we asked also in Norway, for instance, or well, in our country, how many coffees can you buy with 1 minute of subtitling? Or how many pint of beer can you buy with 1 minute of subtitling? Or how many liters of milk you can buy with 1 minute of subtitling? And we found out that, for instance, in Norway, you cannot buy a coffee with 1 minute of subtitling. On average, it's an average town, not the most expensive one, not the small village. And in France, it would be more than four coffees. But in Slovakia, it could be 2, apparently. I don't know if you confirm that. At the better end of the industry. And we can, maybe it's not, so that's, you can see that you actually could live better with subtitling in Slovakia than in Norway. Although Norway, the rate would be much higher than in Slovakia. So we wanted to take that into account. And again, for the pint of beer, in Norway you couldn't buy a pint of beer with 1 minute of subtitling. So that's quite sad.
Also because a pint of beer in Norway is very, very expensive.
Yeah. Okay, we have a few minutes, but we started mentioning food and drinks. So maybe this is the time to give you space for a few questions, and then we'll just move to a few concluding comments. Martin?
Thank you very much for extremely interesting discussion, and I guess I'll be playing a devil's advocate a little bit. Now, first of all, I would like to disagree, Mirek, with you a little bit concerning not teaching students about rates. I mean, that's just not the thing, because there is such a subject, at least in Slovakia, called praxeology of translation, where students are being taught about rates at different levels of translation industry. So it might have been the case, let's say, 15 years ago, but not anymore. But thanks for the rest of the comments, they were fantastic. Then I would like to ask you whether people do care about quality at all. I mean, especially now, I don't know if you have studies on impact of TV and cinema comparing to internet and streaming platforms and fan subbing. But a lot of, let's say, our students watch TV series online, for example, streaming services, and they just watch subtitles and read it, and I'm not sure whether they do care about that. Maybe students of translation studies do care about it, but the rest of them, I'm not quite sure, so I'd like to ask you about that. And I would like to see country-specific data. I hope you publish the research, Emília, quite soon, because country-specific data would be interesting. Because I would like to ask you about the market for AVT translators. So how many people should we train at universities concerning AVT translation? Because if we train like hundreds of them, they might end up without a job. So what is the market situation in your countries, and how many people should we train? Thank you.
Yeah. All right, if I answer your first question, do people care about quality? My impression is that they do, but like Slovakia, Denmark is a subtitling country, and has been for a very, very long time. And we've been talking about cinema today, but the bulk of the work, of course, is all the TV products that are translated into Danish, and overwhelmingly from English. So there's a very important job in creating good quality subtitles, because people read subtitles several hours a day, depending on what they watch. And of course it's going to affect their language skills. mistakes and so on are going to affect the way people write themselves and talk and so on. Whenever you tell somebody that you work with subtitling, they have an opinion. So it is obviously something in subtitling countries, certainly, it is obviously something people care a lot about. It is very difficult to make them complain. We want to make them complain. We have a thing on our website where you can access most of the TV stations and write a complaint via email. We know that Netflix has a specific, you go to the Netflix website and it says, you may have to dig a little, but they actually have a function where you can write to them about the quality of their subtitles. I don't think any of the other streaming services do that. They don't want to hear from you. At least Netflix does want to hear from you. But it's very difficult to move. Whether they listen, it's very difficult to say. Thank you for reaching out, is the standard answer. So it's very difficult to say. We know they are working on subtitling quality. Where that which direction that work goes in, we don't know. But at least they're talking to people. But it's very difficult to get viewers to complain, although complaints would be very helpful to us because they help to explain this thing that you get what you pay for. And if a subtitler is paid very poorly, that subtitle has to work very fast. And you can't maintain quality that way. So complaints are very helpful to us. So my impression is, although I don't know about the studies on the matter, but my impression and the impression of all my colleagues is people care a lot about the quality of subtitles. But it's difficult to make them do something about it.
How many young translators are coming onto the market? Well, quite honestly, in France, it's too many. There have been a huge increase in the number of university training programs, and that has driven the rates down because there are more and more translators coming onto the market, and so most of them need to work because they have to pay for their studies and whatever, and so companies are making the most of that to drive the rates down. So it is a problem. There are basically, in France at least, too many people being trained for the job. Although they have to wait for the old people like us to get out of the way.
Okay, maybe one more question. Here in the... Please, let's try brief.
Well, first question on you about the union. Should it be union for audiovisual translators or translators in general? By the way, in Slovakia, my impression is that the translators are more likely to be lonely riders. It's going to be very difficult to get them into the union. Still, I would like to know, union for translators in general, or just for audiovisual, for legal, for this kind, that kind? And second question on you about the price recommendations. Doesn't come into conflict with the price cartel legislation?
Should I just answer the last point? Because it's only a recommendation, it doesn't come into conflict with anything. It's just a recommendation. Nobody is obliged to apply those rates.
Yes, in Denmark also, it's not a problem to make recommendations. I know that in Spain, the ATRE, the association there, has had problems with making recommendations because they say it's it's a cartel sort of activity. But with the new ruling from the Council of Europe about freelancers and their right to organize, this could change. I think that all translators benefit from belonging to a union. And I will exemplify this by telling you that the audiovisual translators were offered to join the Danish Union of Journalists. And we didn't ask anybody's permission, we just did it. And now we have the backing of a real union. it also has, as any real union does, it has a conflict fund, which means that if translators don't go on strike as such, but if you say, no, I'm not taking a job for this company because I'm dissatisfied with the rates and neither are my colleagues, then the union will be able to provide you with 90% of your regular, what you normally earn from this company for, we're a small group, so for a very long time, so that we can actually put action behind our words. You know, we can do what we say we want to do. Not many translators want to do things like that. Although there recently was our Norwegian colleagues did this because rates were just so ridiculously low from a particular company that they actually did this. We know they've done it in Finland without having any backing whatsoever. They just survived, I don't know how. But it's very rare. But the literary translators, because they're a nice bunch of cultured, polite people, they asked the Ministry of Culture whether they could form a union, and were told that this was not allowed because that would be a cartel and so on. And they have suffered for it. Now, with this new ruling, it could be helping them, and they could be possibly on their way to forming a union. But they have not had any form of clout or strength to put to get to take the action they want to take. So they've had a much more difficult time of it, really, and also haven't been able to recommend fees and so on. They're a section, the translators, the literary translators and the technical translators form a section of the Authors Association, the Writers Association. But they want to be a union. They certainly do. And when we look at the countries, the more organized people are in associations and unions, the better the fees are.
Now maybe, Ian, would you like to react? You just took the mic. Sorry. Maybe, because we said it in all of the 3 sections, we really do have to invite you again at least for a week, because it's wonderful talking to you and it's so much you can tell us, but maybe I would get back to Jean-François as he started today, so I will come with very sophisticated and non-academic question. Jean-François, you normally look at history of film translation. What do you think the future holds for our students who are here and who are the majority of the audience? And what positive does the future hold for them?
It's another trick question. I can look at the past based on evidence and witnesses and archival material. I'm no divine person. I can't look into, I can't decipher the future. I don't even know about my own future in the business, let alone the whole profession as such. So it's very difficult to forecast. What I can say is that I'm part, as Ian mentioned it, I'm now a member of the old guard of translators, but I'm still in the business, and I will do whatever I can to contribute to fighting for decent working conditions and pay conditions. It's an everyday job on top of the job of translating.
Okay, so at this moment I would like to thank all of you very much. It was wonderful to have you, and I really do hope you will come again. So thank you very much for that.